From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
People can come in, but they have to come in through the ports of entry, and that to me is a very important thing. We're not letting them in, but they're trying to flood our country.
Once again, a federal judge blocks a Trump ban on migrants, this time Trump's asylum ban, weeks after the president announced new immigration rules to deny asylum to migrants who enter the country outside ports of entry. We'll speak with one of the lawyers who sued the Trump administration over the ban, Center for Constitutional Rights legal director Baher Azmi. Then, less than a month after a gunman opened fire at a Pittsburgh synagogue, killing 11 Jewish worshippers, we speak with investigative reporter A.C. Thompson on the rise of neo-Nazis in America.
Over the past few years, I've been reporting on a resurgent white supremacist movement. I've seen its ideas migrate into the mainstream. I've seen violence in cities across the country. And now this, what looks to be the deadliest attack on the Jewish community in American history. And I fear there will be more to come.
On the same day Robert Bowers opened fire in the Pittsburgh synagogue, a neo-Nazi he was communicating with took his own life in Washington, D.C. The man's brother has since been arrested on weapons charges. The brothers were both linked to the violent white supremacist group Atomwaffen. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. A federal court in California put a temporary halt Monday to President Trump's order denying asylum to anyone who enters the United States outside a legal port of entry. Trump announced the move earlier this month, apparently in response to the Central American migrant caravans he turned into a major flashpoint in the run-up to the midterm elections. U.S. District Judge John Tiger, who ruled on the case, wrote, "Whatever the scope of the president's authority, he may not rewrite the immigration laws to impose a condition that Congress has expressly forbidden. Failure to comply with entry requirements, such as arriving at a designated port of entry, should bear little, if any, weight in the asylum process," unquote. After headlines, we'll speak about Trump's asylum ban with Baher Azmi of the Center for Constitutional Rights. The Trump administration will begin to draw down the nearly 6,000 troops stationed at the U.S.-Mexico border as early as this week, with all active-duty military expected to leave their stations within a month. In the run-up to the midterm elections, President Trump deployed military troops to the border to protect against what he called an invasion of Central American migrants, at one point suggesting he could send up to 15,000 troops. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis visited soldiers last week and admitted there was no clear long-term plan for the military deployment. This comes as CNN is reporting President Trump is planning to grant new authority to troops to use military force against migrants if they determine the migrants pose a threat of violence to Border Patrol officers. The Pentagon had previously denied a request from Homeland Security to allow troops to perform law enforcement duties, which could constitute a violation of the Posse Comitatus Act. As more migrants from several Central American caravans arrive at the Mexican border city of Tijuana, some local residents are protesting their presence, echoing language used by President Trump, referring to the migrants as an invasion and chanting Mexico first. Some demonstrators clashed with police as they protested outside a migrant shelter Sunday. This is Honduran migrant Karina Morzales addressing the recent protests.
They have the right to protest because they don't like that we're here. But in spite of everything, they, the Mexicans, are good people. They are the same as us, but we're only passing through. We won't stay here.
An estimated 3,000 Central American migrants are in Tijuana to request asylum in the United States, with more arrivals expected in the coming days. In Chicago, a gunman shot and killed 3 people at Mercy Hospital Monday. The victims include a doctor, a police officer, and a pharmacy technician. The gunman was also killed at the scene. Chicago police said the shooter was previously in a relationship with the first victim, Dr. Tamara O'Neill, who was shot outside the hospital in the parking lot before the shooter ran inside the hospital when police arrived on the scene. The other 2 victims were identified as pharmacy resident Dana Less and and police officer Samuel Jimenez. The majority of domestic violence deaths involve firearms. A study by the gun control advocacy group Every Town for Gun Safety found the majority of mass shootings between 2009 and 2016 were committed by intimate partners or family. Earlier this month, doctors around the country started sharing photos of bloodied scrubs and operation rooms on social media after NRA told doctors to, quote, stay in their lane after the release of new recommendations from the medical community to reduce gun violence. The photos went viral on social media with the hashtags "Stay in my lane" and "This is my lane." The death toll for the Northern California Camp Fire has now reached at least 79. The number of missing persons has dropped to 700. The wildfire is now 70% contained as search and rescue efforts continue in Paradise, which was decimated by the flames, with nearly 12,000 homes destroyed and over 150,000 acres burned. With area shelters filled to capacity, displaced residents now face the question of where to go. Hundreds of people living in a Walmart parking lot in the city of Chico were asked to leave over the weekend, although many camps were still up Monday. This is displaced resident Amy Shepard.
As of right now, we're just making it day by day, hoping that we can get back up to our property and start to rebuild our lives again. So now life is very hard, especially with the little ones, trying to keep them happy and healthy and fed. And the food has been given free by so many sources. People are just outsourcing everywhere. They're coming with food, and so that's not been a problem. As clothing too, they're helping with.
Meanwhile, rain is forecast in Northern California from Wednesday through Friday, prompting a flash flood warning for the region as major storms threaten to further complicate living conditions for those sleeping outdoors, as well as hamper ongoing search efforts. The Washington Post reports the Justice Department considered breaching the confidentiality of U.S. Census data and sharing the information with law enforcement officials. A 2017 email between a Justice Department attorney and the acting Assistant Attorney General John Gore reportedly suggested avoiding questions from a Democratic Congress member about whether census data could ever be shared with law enforcement in case, quote, related issues come up later for renewed debate, unquote. This comes as several lawsuits are challenging the Trump administration's efforts to include a citizenship question on the 2020 census. Advocates say the move could deter immigrants from completing the census and could impact everything from redrawing of congressional maps to the allocation of federal funds. The Guardian is reporting members of the billionaire Sackler family could soon face criminal investigations over their role in fueling America's opioid epidemic. Prosecutors in Connecticut and New York are considering charges of fraud and racketeering against the Sacklers, whose company Purdue Pharma produces the prescription painkiller OxyContin. Earlier this year, the New York Times reported Purdue executives knew OxyContin was highly addictive as early as 1996, the first year after the drug hit the market, but still promoted it as less addictive than other opioids. A lead attorney taking on Purdue Pharma, Paul Hanley, said of the Sacklers, quote, "This is essentially a crime family, drug dealers in nice suits and dresses." The Sacklers are known worldwide for their patronage of the arts, and the Sackler name appears on museum exhibitions, including the Metropolitan Museum in New York and the Tate in London. The Washington Post is reporting White House senior advisor and presidential daughter, Ivanka Trump, used a personal email account and private email servers to send hundreds of messages to cabinet officials and aides in violation of federal records rules. Ivanka reportedly sent the emails through a domain name she shared with her husband, Jared Kushner, who's also a senior White House advisor. When questioned by other White House officials over the practice, Ivanka Trump reportedly said she was unfamiliar with some details of the rules. Ahead of the 2016 election, Donald Trump repeatedly led chants of "lock her up" at campaign rallies as he attacked his opponent Hillary Clinton over her use of a private email server she used as Secretary of State. In Texas, Democrat Gina Ortiz Jones conceded to Republican incumbent Will Hurd Monday in a congressional race Democrats had hoped to flip. So far, Democrats have claimed 37 seats in the House of Representatives in these new elections. 3 Democratic senators are suing to remove Matt Whitaker from his role as acting attorney general, saying the appointment is unconstitutional and aimed at derailing special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation. In a statement, Rhode Island Senator Sheldon Whitehouse said, quote, "The stakes are too high to allow the president to install an unconfirmed lackey to lead the Department of Justice, a lackey whose stated purpose, apparently, is undermining a major investigation into the president," unquote. Joining the lawsuit are Senators Mazie Hirono of Hawaii and Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut. 16 Democratic Congress members and Congress members-elect released a letter Monday saying they oppose Nancy Pelosi's bid to resume her role as House Speaker in January. They write they're, quote, "committed to voting for new leadership in both our caucus meeting and on the House floor," unquote. 2 of the letter's signatories are in races that have yet to be called. Pelosi will need 218 votes in order to secure the House leadership position. So far, no challengers to Pelosi have been announced. Long-serving Congressmember John Lewis has joined other lawmakers in supporting incoming New York Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's call for a Green New Deal. Lewis is the highest-profile Congress member so far to back Ocasio-Cortez's resolution to create a bipartisan committee that would work on a plan to bring the U.S. to a carbon-neutral economy and adopt 100% renewable energy. The proposal for the committee also seeks to bar lawmakers who've accepted money from the fossil fuel industry. Other lawmakers who support the formation of the committee include Congress members Ro Khanna, Carolyn Maloney, and the incoming Deb Haaland, Ilhan Omar, and Rashida Tlaib. On Monday, climate activists from the youth-led Sunrise Movement disrupted an event with DNC Chair Tom Perez in Rhode Island to demand the Democratic Party do more to combat climate change and back Congressmember-elect Ocasio-Cortez's committee.
As we speak, nearly 1,000 people are missing in the California fires and over 77 have perished. As the UN climate report tells us, we only have 12 years to radically transform our economy and society to stop the crisis of climate change. But politicians like you have not demonstrated the leadership we need to meet the scale and scope of this crisis. We need you to stand up for our generation. We are asking that the DNC reject all contributions from fossil fuel lobbyists and executives, and we are asking for the Green New Deal to be incorporated into the Democratic Party platform.
Sunrise Movement is organizing a Green New Deal Day of Action around the country today. President Trump's reportedly considering visiting troops in Iraq and Afghanistan. It would be his first visit to a war zone since he took office. Trump has come under fire for skipping recent visits to a cemetery for World War I soldiers in France last weekend, followed by a missed visit to Arlington National Cemetery on Veterans Day. On Sunday, he attacked former Navy SEAL Admiral William McRaven, who oversaw the U.S. operation that killed Osama bin Laden, calling him a Hillary Clinton fan and an Obama backer during an interview with Fox News. Nissan chairman Carlos Ghosn was arrested in Japan Monday after an internal investigation revealed significant financial misconduct. Ghosn is suspected of violating financial laws by filing false statements and underreporting his income by more than $40 million over a 5-year period. The FBI has classified the far-right group Proud Boys as a, quote, extremist group with ties to white nationalism. A report by Washington state law enforcement from August revealed the FBI classification and stated the group is actively recruiting in the Pacific Northwest. The report also said, quote, Proud Boys members have contributed to the recent escalation of violence at political rallies held on college campuses and in cities like Charlottesville, Virginia, Portland, Oregon, and Seattle, Washington, unquote. Last month, New York police charged members of the group with rioting and assault after they attacked anti-fascist protesters on the streets of New York City after a talk given by leader Gavin McInnes at the Metropolitan Republican Club. Later in the broadcast, we'll speak with investigative reporter A.C. Thompson about the rise of neo-Nazis in America. In the Gaza Strip, an Associated Press camera operator was shot in the leg and wounded Monday while covering a protest near Israel's heavily militarized separation barrier. Witnesses report 47-year-old Rashid Rashid was nearly 2,000 feet away from the fence when he was shot by an Israeli soldier. Rashid suffered multiple bone fractures above the ankle and will need surgery. He was filming from an elevated area looking down on the protest wearing a blue helmet and a vest with the word press clearly written on it. The White House fully restored CNN correspondent Jim Acosta's press credentials Monday, one day after threatening to reimpose its ban when a judge's temporary order expires in 2 weeks. CNN announced the news, saying their lawsuit was no longer necessary. Newly elected Minnesota Congressmember Ilhan Omar is at the forefront of a move to overturn a long-standing ban on headscarves and other religious headwear on the House floor. Omar is the first Somali-American elected to the U.S. House of Representatives and will become, along with Rashida Tlaib of Michigan, the first Muslim women in Congress. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. We begin today's show in California, where a federal judge has temporarily halted President Trump's new asylum ban, which attempted to deny asylum to anyone entering the country from outside of a legal port of entry. Trump announced the move earlier this month as he escalated his attacks on the Central American migrant caravans.
People can come in, but they have to come in through the ports of entry, and that to me is a very important thing. We're not letting them in, but they're trying to flood our country.
Well, on Monday, U.S. District Judge John Tiger put a temporary halt on the order, writing, quote, "Plaintiffs and the immigrants they represent will suffer irreparable injury if the rule goes into effect pending resolution of this case. Asylum seekers will be put at increased risk of violence and other harms at the border, and many will be deprived of meritorious asylum claims. The government offers nothing in support of the new rule that outweighs the need to avoid these harms."
In response to the court's ruling, ACLU attorney Lee Gallant, who argued the case, said, quote, "This ban is illegal, will put people's lives in danger, and raises the alarm about President Trump's disregard for separation of powers. There's no justifiable reason to flatly deny people the right to apply for asylum, and we cannot send them back to danger based on the manner of their entry. Congress has been clear on this point for decades." We now go to San Francisco, where we're joined by one of the lawyers who sued the Trump administration over the ban. The Center for Constitutional Rights legal director, Bahar Azmi. Welcome back to Democracy Now!, Bahar. Can you explain the judge's ruling and how significant this is?
Good morning, Amy. Yeah, this is another important judicial ruling checking arbitrary executive action by the Trump administration. In this case, attempting to overrule 40 years of clear congressionally mandated asylum law by the stroke of a pen. Congress has written very clearly in the Immigration and Nationality Act that individuals are entitled to apply for asylum, whether they whether they enter the United States at a port of entry and subject to routine inspection, or whether they enter outside a port of entry, whether they cross what the government would say unlawfully. And that's a protection that codifies the United States obligation, very long-standing and important international human rights principles, which recognizes that refugees fleeing often unspeakable violence need to have a safe haven without being so regulated by the government. And in light of the sort of practical reality that refugees fleeing violence, often with nothing more than the clothes on their backs, don't necessarily understand the difference between a port of entry and other places to enter. So this is a significant victory for the rule of law and for the basic protections, humanitarian protections of asylum law.
And Bahir, the law even stipulates not just people who have crossed illegally into the United States, but also people who are interdicted in international waters or in U.S. waters, but who seek asylum as well, doesn't it?
I think the interdiction piece on international waters is a little bit tricky. But what's totally unambiguous is that the individuals who are entering the United States across the southern border are entitled to apply for asylum and make a case that they have a well-founded fear of persecution and may suffer violence, torture, or death, or return to their home countries.
It was interesting that Judge Tiger said the government offers nothing in support of the new rule that outweighs the need to avoid these harms. The government offers nothing. Can you compare what Trump tried to do here with what he did when he first came into office with the so-called Muslim ban?
Yeah, that was a really significant point that the judge made, and throughout the hearing expressed deep skepticism about the factual basis for this rule. And in a way, it looks a lot like the Muslim ban, and I think is in many ways motivated by the same hostility towards non-citizens, and so the Muslim ban is a sort of attempted total shutdown of Muslims in airports, and this combined with other actions that reflect deep hostility to the asylum laws looks like an attempted shutdown of the southern border to Central and Southern Americans. And it's true, there was no evidence to justify this so-called emergency action. The Trump administration talked about a crisis, but the truth is migration to the southern border are at historically low rates, and apprehensions by Customs and Border Protection at outside of ports of entry are also at historic lows, a fraction of what they were in the year 2000. And so, this is gratifying because sometimes in courts of law, as opposed to in presidential press conferences or these one-off proclamations, courts can hold the executive branch to an obligation of reason and evidence, and rationality. And I think what the court implicitly recognized here is this is arbitrary action that is unlawful.
What about the procedural issue that this order was issued without any public notice or chance for public comment or any of the normal procedures that would come about as a result of this kind of administrative decision?
Yeah, that's a very important point as well. They issued this the federal law, congressional law requires that when agencies make substantial changes to agency rules, they have to publish them and invite notice and comment. And the administration attempted to bypass that really important requirement by, again, claiming a crisis and claiming foreign affairs power. But there is no crisis, as the judge implicitly recognizes, that would permit the administration to bypass notice and comment. And there's no, the court was rightly skeptical of this sort of broad claim of foreign relations power, emergency executive power. And what's critical about the attempt to forego the notice and comment process, which at its core is an attempt to ensure transparency and democratic accountability and prevent bureaucratic error by bypassing it in this case and preventing our clients, who are prominent grassroots immigrant rights organizations that are expert in migration patterns and the consequences and impacts on asylum seekers. They were denied the opportunity to correct the false and misguided assumptions that underlie this executive order. And had they been able to provide notice and comment, they would have been able to inform the public that there is no migration crisis, that caravans are in fact routine and done in order to protect the safety of migrants, that apprehensions are at historic lows, and that the attempted rationale here of the administration of the sort of a tidy attempt to incentive to channel people out from outside of ports of entry to ports of entry is just wildly unrealistic given the realities on the ground.
So, Bahir, I mean, given the fact that this order was so obviously in contradiction to existing law, and as devoted as President Trump's attorneys may be to him, they know how to read the law. What do you think was behind this effort of the Trump administration to declare this ban?
Well, I can't speak to what their lawyers were thinking, but I think. And this came through a little bit the hearing as well. Given the absence of any legitimate rationale for this particular rule, this is starting to look like the obvious broad-based attack on the very nature of asylum law in this country. We can see that from not only this rule, but the family separation policy, which was designed to impose maximum cruelty in order to deter individuals from seeking asylum, from rhetoric coming from high-level administration officials calling asylum a legal loophole, despite our decades-long obligation to asylum principles. And importantly, as we've revealed in another lawsuit filed in San Diego, even at ports of entry, the administration is consistently denying individuals access to the asylum process by making misrepresentations about the unavailability of asylum, by asking the Mexican government to intercept individuals and sort of push them away from ports of entry, and by engaging in a system of metering, which is designed to slow down to a crawl the possibility of seeking asylum. And we've been hearing that there are anticipated waits of up to 6 weeks to access the asylum process, even at ports of entry in places that are extremely dangerous, and which in fact drive people in desperation to try and cross outside the ports of entry. There is a deep humanitarian crisis happening in the Northern Triangle countries, and people are fleeing unspeakable violence and persecution. And our obligation under basic human rights principles is to accept their applications and see if, in fact, they have a bona fide fear of return to their home countries.
Bahir Asmi, finally, what happens now? So the judge has ruled, temporarily blocked this ban. What's the next step?
He's invited both sides to make additional evidentiary and legal submissions in the coming weeks, and has ordered another hearing in a month on December 19th, where he will consider issuing a kind of final injunction, barring this rule from going into effect. But from now until then, this rule is deemed unlawful.
And then eventually, depending on which side wins, this goes to the Kavanaugh Supreme Court?
Hard to say eventually if it will wind up in the Supreme Court, but it would, likely either side who loses would appeal to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And then it wouldn't surprise me if it wound up in the United States Supreme Court.
Well, I want to thank you very much for being with us, Bahir Asmi, Legal Director for the Center for Constitutional Rights in San Francisco right now, where a judge just handed down this extremely significant ruling stopping Trump's attempt to stop migrants from applying for political asylum outside of legal ports of entry. When we come back, we speak with frontline ProPublica investigative reporter A.C. Thompson on the rise of neo-Nazis in America. Stay with us. Radiator water by human people. This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Well, nearly a month after a gunman opened fire at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, killing 11 Jewish worshipers, we spend the rest of the hour looking at the rise of neo-Nazis in America. Tonight, a new documentary airs around the country by Frontline and ProPublica reporter A.C. Thompson. It's titled Documenting Hate, New American Nazis.
Hold the perimeter, we're under fire. We're under fire. He's got an automatic weapon. He's firing out in front of the synagogue.
Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, October 27th, 2018.
3410, please send the medics up here. I got one alive. We're evacuating one right now.
Robert Bowers storms into the Tree of Life Synagogue with an AR-15 and kills 11 Jewish worshipers.
7-1 suspects talking about all these Jews need to die.
We have multiple casualties inside the synagogue. We have 3 officers who have been shot.
Members of the Tree of Life Synagogue, conducting a peaceful service in their place of worship, were brutally murdered by a gunman targeting them simply because of their faith.
Another act of terror in America. The country again left to ask, where does this hate come from? Could it have been prevented?
It's just been 24 hours since Robert Bowers stormed into this synagogue and said, "I just want to kill Jews."
Over the past few years, I've been reporting on a resurgent white supremacist movement. I've seen its ideas migrate into the mainstream. I've seen violence in cities across the country. And now this, what looks to be the deadliest attack on the Jewish community in American history. And I fear there will be more to come.
Synagogue gunman Robert Bowers had a long history of openly railing against Jews and immigrants on social media sites, circulating racist memes and asserting Jews are the enemy of white people. In his posts, Bowers made specific and repeated threats against Jews, including one just before allegedly attacking the Tree of Life Synagogue. He wrote, "Hias," he was referring to the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, "Hias likes to bring invaders in that kill our people," referring to the caravan and the immigrants on the border. On the same day that Bowers opened fire in the Pittsburgh synagogue, a neo-Nazi named Edward Clark that Bowers had been communicating with took his own life in Washington, D.C. The man's brother, Jeffrey Clark, has since been arrested on weapons charges. The brothers were both linked to the violent white supremacist group Atomwaffen. Well, for more, we go to Boston, where we're joined by A.C. Thompson, correspondent for Frontline PBS, reporter for ProPublica. His investigation, Documenting Hate, New American Nazis, premieres tonight on PBS stations around the country and online at pbs.org/frontline. AC, welcome back to Democracy Now! For the second of your series. You posted that report about what happened on the same day Bowers opened fire in Pittsburgh in Washington, D.C. Why don't you begin there?
So this is a fascinating aspect of the story and disturbing, right? So we all know what happened in Pittsburgh. We have Robert Bowers. We have a man who was spewing anti-Semitic, racist invective online. He was using the platform Gab to network with other white supremacists. He's accused of going into the Tree of Life Synagogue and killing 11 worshipers, attacking police, and so forth. The story that comes out after that is really bizarre, fascinating, and disturbing. And this is the story. We have 2 brothers in Washington, D.C. They are part of the white nationalist scene, and they start out sort of hanging out with Richard Spencer and that crew. And they gravitate more and more and more to the full Nazi fringe. They get involved with Vanguard America, which is one of the groups that marched in Charlottesville, one of the groups tied to the murder of Heather Heyer in Charlottesville. And then what we know after that, looking through the chat logs of the extreme neo-Nazi group Atomwaffen Division, we know that one of the brothers shows up in those chat logs as somebody who is hanging out with Atomwaffen's Northern Virginia contingent. His online handle shows up in there, communicating with other Northern Virginia people from his area. Police go to the scene to the house where the two brothers shared recently, and they find Adam Waffen literature as well. By this time, one of the brothers, Edward Clark, has committed suicide. He committed suicide on the morning of the synagogue massacre, right around the time of the synagogue massacre. And the other brother, Jeffrey Clark, gets arrested for weapons charges, for having high-capacity magazines, ammunition magazines, and they find all this racist literature and Adam Waffen literature. So now what we're looking at is this Adam Waffen division, extreme neo-Nazi group, being tied to this incredible act of violence in Pittsburgh, and we're really not sure where the story is going to go from here, but it's a really interesting, disturbing development.
Well, AC, I want to turn back to your investigation documenting hate New American Nazis. This clip is about the neo-Nazi group Adam Waffen.
Adam Waffen was founded in 2015 by Brandon Russell, a National Guardsman in his early 20s. He moved into this apartment complex with 3 other members of the group. One of them, an 18-year-old high school dropout named Devin Arthurs, would bring Adam Waffen to the attention of the authorities.
Friday night, Tampa police arrested 18-year-old Devin Arthurs. He confessed to killing his roommates, 22-year-old Jeremy Himmelman and 18-year-old Andrew Onishuk.
Arthurs told cops a 4th roommate, Brandon Russell, participates in neo-Nazi chat rooms.
The common thread that connected all 4 roommates was neo-Nazi beliefs.
Why had Arthurs apparently shot 2 of his roommates? His father agreed to talk to me about what happened that day.
I was working in my office, and the cell phone went off, and it was Devin. And he said, "Dad, I'm sorry. I've really messed up. I've really messed up." I said, what's the matter, buddy? What's going on? The 2 guys, the 2 that were staying or whatever, they're dead. I shot them. They upset me, and I shot them. I tried to hold it together, and I said, "Put the gun down or any weapon down and go turn yourself in right now. Right now." All I was hearing, I'm sorry, Dad, I'm sorry. I said, "Just turn yourself in."
Alan Arthurs says Devin began gravitating to neo-Nazi ideas when he was 13 or 14 years old. So is this junior ROTC? What is?
Yeah, that's ROTC in high school.
He was really interested in the military.
That's what he said.
What do you think he was really interested in?
There were 2 other brothers and another member of that ROTC that were obviously into the neo-Nazi stuff.
So you think he was joining the ROTC group because there were other kids that were into Nazism in the group?
Yes, definitely. And he had gone to Tampa.
Arthur says his relationship with his son became increasingly strained.
Because by the time we weren't talking, and I didn't even,
Devin ended up dropping out of high school. He eventually moved into the Tampa apartment with Russell and the other Adam Waffen members. Did you ever talk to Devin since the incident?
He said that he would not, when he figured out what Brandon was going to do, he couldn't live with himself. That's all he's ever said to me.
Tampa police refused to talk to us about the case, but I obtained video of Devin Arthurs' police interview. Over and over, he tells detectives about Adam Waffen.
Adam Waffen Division is a terrorist organization. It's a neo-Nazi organization that I was a part of. But the things that they were planning were horrible. They're planning bombings and stuff like that on countless people. They're planning to kill civilian life.
Were they specific in their plans?
Power lines, nuclear reactors, synagogues.
Nuclear reactors, synagogues. That was neo-Nazi Devin Arthur in his police interview after allegedly shooting and killing 2 fellow members of Adam Waffen. A.C. Thompson, take us back to the founding of Adam Waffen and how the group has developed.
It's a really interesting story. So Adam Waffen develops the way a lot of these groups develop now, out of the online world. It starts with young men conversing on a fascist forum called Iron March. And on that forum, Devin Russell would post memes about how he loved school shooters, about how he loved Adolf Hitler. He posted a picture of himself carrying a Mossberg shotgun with a t-shirt that said "Natural Born Killers" and a Nazi eagle below it. And at one point in 2015, he said, hey, I'm starting this group. I've been thinking about it for a long time. If you want to get involved, contact me. We're going to be about the militant stuff. We're going to be about sort of armed struggle for the fascist cause to take over the government and start a race war and impose our fascist ideas on this country. And that's how he got followers. People joined up with the group that way. And it networked using the internet, using modern communications tools, so that there have been nodes of the group created all over the country that are all sort of linked using encrypted chats, using various tools to keep them in communication. We now think there's somewhere between 50 and 80 members of the group. We know there's members in Canada. We know people in Australia have gotten involved. And we know that the group's linked to 5 different murders.
What about their ideological guru that you talk about, James Mason? Who is he, and what's his relationship to the group?
So James Mason was kind of an obscure figure in the neo-Nazi movement. He had been involved with the American Nazi Party of George Lincoln Rockwell. He had been involved with other neo-Nazi groups, but he wasn't really a main player. Mason's deal is he says, hey, we're not going to create Nazism, fascism in America through the ballot box. We're not going to do it through politics. We're not going to do it through political protest. We're going to do it through the gun. And the way that we're going to do this is terrorism, assassination, acts of hyper-violence, and just general chaos. We're going to collapse the system, and then we will take charge. And that message, which he promulgated in a newsletter called Siege throughout the 80s, has been adopted by this new generation of white supremacists who say, yeah, that's what we want to do. That's the most extreme thing we can do. Let's do it. And they have sort of adopted him as their guru, as their intellectual eminence.
How important are these people? How many are there? And let's go back, AC, to when President Obama first came into office. This report on the threat of white supremacy and domestic terrorists that was squelched by right-wing Congress members who demanded it not be released. Is this what they were tracking?
Yeah, this is exactly what they were tracking. And I think we should say also it was retracted eventually by the Obama administration. Yeah, I mean, that's when this whole thing starts ticking up. 2008, 2009, you see resistance to the first African-American president in this country. You see dissatisfaction from veterans coming home from wars that have been very hard on them, and they're returning to a disastrous economy and having difficulties fitting in some cases. And you see anger about potential gun control legislation. What has happened since then is all these things have ticked up. They've escalated. And now we're in a much more dangerous place than even Daryl Johnson at DHS was predicting at that time. One of the things that he predicted is he said, look, I'm concerned that these returning veterans will get involved with these groups. We've seen it in the past. It may happen again. And that is exactly what's happened. You know, the vast bulk of service members are decent, wonderful people. My father served in the Army. My grandfather served in the Army. I can tell you this. But there has consistently been this small, hard core of members who get involved with these white power groups like Adam Waffen and end up doing pretty serious damage to the country.
But AC, on this issue, though, given the fact that this group is so small, you're mentioning many of them come out of military experience. The reality is that our country has been in virtually perpetual war. So there's been a constant churn of soldiers going out to fight the enemy, learning how to kill and coming back to the country. I'm wondering what your sense is, this situation of perpetual war, how it's affected not just the veterans who might get involved in these extremist groups, but also who might be susceptible once they're back in civilian life to this picture painted by a Trump or another political conservative of the need to fight the enemy.
You know, you put it exactly right. And that's actually what we hear from the veterans who have gotten involved with the white power movement. They say perpetual war. They say, we have been sent to these wars that have been disastrous, that have ruined our friends, that we've seen horrible, horrible things happen. And now we feel broken and we feel damaged. And we're looking around for answers. And where they're finding answers, some of them, honestly, some of them are finding answers in progressive politics and really decent causes. And some of them are finding answers in neo-Nazism. I was just reading chat messages sent by one member of Atomwaffen who served in Afghanistan. And he said, the small moral part of me that still exists has nightmares about the people I know being blown up, about seeing them blown up in combat. And he says, and I feel guilt because I was a squad automatic gunner with a belt-fed machine gun, and I remember killing women and children inadvertently, accidentally, and I feel great guilt about it. And the thing that happens then is this guilt and anger is being channeled into this obviously incredibly noxious, neo-Nazi ideology. But you've nailed it exactly. This perpetual war is having damaging effects back here.
A.C. Thompson, we have to break for 30 seconds, and we're going to come back. Correspondent for Frontline PBS, reporter for ProPublica. His investigation documenting hate, New American Nazis, premieres tonight on PBS stations and online at pbs.org/frontline. When we come back, we continue with A.C. Thompson to look at the connections between the U.S. military and white supremacy. Stay with us.
We are on a sinking ship.
Sinking Ship by Kate. This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
We're continuing to look at the rise of neo-Nazis in America in the wake of the Pittsburgh synagogue massacre and a spate of hate-fueled killings in the U.S. in recent weeks. Still with us is A.C. Thompson, correspondent for Frontline PBS and the reporter for ProPublica. His investigation documenting hate, New American Nazis, premieres tonight on PBS stations and online at pbs.org/frontline. In his investigation, Thompson spoke with Professor Kathleen Ballou, author of Bring the War Home, the White Power Movement and Paramilitary America, on links between the military and Atomwaffen.
We're looking at a current group called the Atomwaffen Division, and they are actively recruiting military members. Does that surprise you?
Not at all. That's a strategy pioneered by the White Power movement in the period of my study and continued throughout the post-Vietnam period. One thing to understand is that throughout American history, there's always a correlation between the aftermath of warfare and this kind of vigilante and revolutionary white power violence. So if you look, for instance, at the surges in Ku Klux Klan membership, they align more consistently with the return of veterans from combat and the aftermath of war than they do with anti-immigration, populism, economic hardship, or any of the other factors that historians have typically used to explain them. Nationalist fervor, populist movements, those are all worse predictors than the aftermath of war.
Tend to correspond then with an upsurge in white power, white supremacist activity?
Always, yes.
Wow.
Ballou outlines a long history of military men who became key figures in the white power movement. George Lincoln Rockwell, World War II veteran and founder of the American Nazi Party. Richard Butler, World War II veteran and founder of the Aryan Nations. Louis Beam, Vietnam veteran and Grand Dragon of the KKK. Timothy McVeigh, Gulf War veteran and Oklahoma City bomber.
It's important to remember, too, that returning veterans that join this movement and active duty troops, we're talking about a tiny, not even statistically significant percentage of veterans. But within this movement, those people who did serve are playing an enormously important role in instruction of weapons, in creating paramilitary activist mentality and training.
When we speak to people involved in this movement today, they talk about leaderless resistance. Can you explain that to me?
Sure. Leaderless resistance is basically what we would understand today as cell-style terrorism. The idea that you can recruit a small number of committed activists, organize them, and then they will behave on their own in a cell without direct ties with movement leadership. If we think, for instance, about the Oklahoma City bombing, Timothy McVeigh is sort of the ideal soldier of leaderless resistance. He's in an infantry unit and serves in the Gulf and is involved in white power groups while he's on post. He's consistently involved in this movement right up to the moment of the Oklahoma City bombing. We know that this is part of the white power movement and an act of leaderless resistance. But we have this memory of that as an act of one person. And as a result, I think we've never really delivered a decisive stop to this activism.
That because we don't understand Oklahoma City as being an outgrowth of an organized movement that has been around for decades, that is modeling the military, that is involving military members, that the authorities have never really been able to put a stop to it.
That's right. The military response to white power activism, like the court response to white power activism and the police response to white power activism, reflects the many ways that our society has not been prepared to deal with this kind of a movement.
That was Professor Kathleen Belew speaking with A.C. Thompson. A.C., why is it then that the military and in the federal government in its counterterrorism efforts places so little attention of the billions of dollars that they spent on counterterrorism dealing with homegrown right-wing extremist terrorism?
You know, that's a great question, and I don't think anybody really knows the full answer to that. I think one thing that we should say is that there has been more aggressive action from the FBI and the Department of Justice recently on this front. So we saw 8 white supremacists involved in the Rise Above movement who were active in Charlottesville and at other protests recently get arrested on rioting charges. We see the FBI looking at this connection between Atomwaffen and the Pittsburgh massacre. But I think in general, there has been this massive turn towards focusing on 9/11 style terrorism and this sort of like sense that the white supremacist anti-government terrorism embodied by people like Tim McVeigh, embodied by people like Wade Page, who was a neo-Nazi who went into a Sikh temple in Wisconsin and killed 6 worshipers, that is not that important. And I think that there's been a sort of loss of the expertise on white supremacist terrorism within the federal government, that everything now is jihadi style terrorism, and that's what people focus on. And so people don't have the institutional knowledge to go after the white supremacists.
A.C. Thompson, for this report, you interviewed a member of Atomwaffen, well named, you call him John. You disguise his voice. His face is blurred. This is a clip.
Back in New York, our Atomwaffen source, John, agreed to talk over video chat with me and my colleague Ali Winston.
So Atomwaffen Division 2, a Nazi extremist group seeking to spread terror. The main thing is lone wolf activity.
When you say lone wolf attacks, it sounds to me like you're talking about basically terrorist acts.
Yeah, they don't see themselves as terrorists, rather they see the United States as the ultimate terrorist. Like what Adolf Hitler said, how do you meet terrorism? You meet it with stronger terrorism. Atomwaffen is made up of about 60 guys, and then you have what is called initiates. That guys were in the process of becoming members, and in order to become a member, you have to prove yourself.
So how many initiates would you say there are?
Or were. when I left, there was more initiates than there were members. That tells me anything. All it takes is one guy to snap in to do something like that. That's what Dylan Roof said. I'm tired of seeing nothing done in the white nationalist community, so I'm going to take a stand, and I'm going to go into church, and I'm going to kill all these black people because no one else is doing anything. Who knows? There could be another Dylan Roof and Adam Moffat.
Dylan Roof, of course, is the young man who opened fire in the AME Church, the Manual Church in Charleston, gunning down African-American worshipers as well as their minister. A.C. Thompson, you disguise John's face, his voice. I mean, this journey you go on, confronting white supremacists or those who want to talk about them, is dangerous for yourself as well. But if you can tell us who John is, how you found him, and then when you find James Mason, him talking about Trump emboldening these people.
Yeah, I mean, what I should say about John is the reason that John's voice is disguised, his identity is disguised, and same with the other former Atomwaffen member that we interview in the film, is they're not scared of the authorities. They're not scared of the public. They're scared of other current Atomwaffen members coming after them or their families and killing them. That's why they're disguised. And that's the sort of fear that people have about talking about these groups when they've been inside these terror organizations. We went out to Texas because Atomwaffen's currently sort of driven from a cell of people in Texas. Houston, Texas. There's a young man named John Cameron Denton. He goes by the online handle Rape. Everyone in the group calls him Rape. And we confronted him out at a black metal, heavy metal festival in Houston and said basically like, hey, you know, you're talking about killing people all the time. You're making threats to people online. You're celebrating mass murder. We'd love to interview you about your views. He didn't want to talk, but we did eventually get the guy, James Mason, who's sort of been the inspiration for this group, who's an advisor to the group, to talk to us. And what he said was pretty fascinating.
What did he say?
So, you know, we expected that he would say, overthrow the government, smash the state, impose fascism. And he did celebrate Tim McVeigh. He celebrated James Alex Fields, the man accused of killing Heather Heyer. He did say, I welcome the chaos. But the thing that he said that surprised us is he said, but you know, I'm sort of reconsidering these days. We have Trump in office now, and I really see Trump as an ally. So I don't really know where things are going to go from here. And I'm sort of rethinking my philosophy a little bit. And that surprised us. That was a little bit of a shock to us.
AC, very quickly, you have the Thousand Oaks killing of 12 people. That man served in the military. Parkland, he was in JROTC, the yoga studio killing in Tallahassee. He was in the military. In the last 10 seconds we have, how do you think this can be dealt with?
Yeah, you know, I think one key thing is that we need military authorities to really keep an eye on the types of people coming into the service and the things that they are doing in the service. And we need sort of general thoughtfulness and vigilance on this.
I want to thank you so much for being with us. Again, A.C. Thompson, correspondent for Frontline PBS, reporter for ProPublica. His investigation, Documenting Hate, New American Nazis, premieres tonight, Tuesday night on PBS stations, online at pbs.org/frontline. That does it for our broadcast. Democracy Now! Produced by Mike Burke, Dina Guzder, Nermeen Sheikh, Carla Wells, Tammy Warnoff, Sam Alkoff. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Thanks so much for joining us.